and isn't quite ready to do that or isn't interested in doing that, yeah, I mean, obviously there could be a value there for someone like that. It was just kind of shocking to me to think about it, that as much as I love it, I'm not sure if it's the right thing to do next year.
Personally, I still find there is a lot of value for me. I get to see people that I don't normally see. I get to interact with some fantastic minds. I don't think it's necessarily the responsibility for CAST to take on moving the industry forward. So I don't necessarily look at my attendance here on being contingent upon us advancing the craft. It's a way for me to personally get better at my craft. I don't necessarily think that CAST has to take on such a mammoth task as improving our entire industry. I'm happy to come here and explore ideas that I have about my own testing. I always come away from these from CAST energized and better equipped to cope with stuff that I hadn't even realized I needed to be coping with. So for me and my own personal growth, I think there's massive value. In terms of advancing the industry, I think if you're coming here to do that, then maybe there's not so much value. I think if you wanted to do that, then you're probably better off attending non-testing conferences and talking to those people about testing and helping to educate them about testing. But I think in terms of attending CAST, that's not the reason that I come.
Yeah, I get the notion that you have a kind of like, refreshing the spirit, so to speak, and reestablishing those connections in the community. And I obviously think those things are important, but I just wonder, in some sense, there's been talk in recent years about, the big tent, is everyone in the tent and things like that. I'm not even sure that's the case anymore. I just wonder if, in some sense with it's still good to do those kind of things for you as a tester to keep you fresh and keep you engaged and things like that. But at the same time, along the lines of the talk that I gave at Let's Test this year, being concerned about kind of some of the emerging technologies that are coming out there, and our testers scaling and even thinking and discussing those kinds of topics, with things like, big data, artificial intelligence systems, things like that. To me, sometimes it seems like there's not enough fresh ideas that come in, and a lot of the time, even when you're at something like this and having really good discussions with really smart people, they sometimes tend to be the same discussions, and not enough of the speed of new conversation isn't quite there. And so that's that kind of and I don't like the word evangelizing necessarily, but just the idea of getting out and interacting with these other groups and constituencies and things like that. Maybe not just for improving the perception of testers and the role that they play, but to bring that back and kind of infuse that, and get more testers at non-tester conferences and more non-testers at tester conferences potentially. It's just a little bit of that sameness that I'm starting to wonder about, if I'm being really critical about it.
So in terms of treading the same ground, do you think that's something that's common to CAST alone, or is it specific to CAST alone, or common to other testing conferences? I mean,
or just conferences in general, maybe even, ones that along the line of professional conferences like this. I don't really know if like scientific conferences have that kind of things that they grapple with, obviously the search for the Higgs, maybe, they've been talking about that for 20 years at the same conferences, and they were sick of it too. But that was the thing that they thought was most important to work on. And so there was no question about changing or should we be, pulling in other kinds of influences or something like that. So it's just, it's kind of that thing of I've been watching a lot of Alan Kay videos recently, and he talks a lot about history of computing and things like that. And to me, it seems like we don't have 60 years of computing. We have 20 years repeated 3 times so far. And so it's maybe not even the conference is reflecting the field.
It's an interesting thought. I wonder if by going out and attending non-testing conferences that you yourself might be able to bring that back to CAST and might be able to bring that back to testing in general, if that was something that you were to present here, whether that's something that would change if you were to take that to the organisers of CAST and say, look, this is something that I really feel strongly that we should do. It's all well and good for us to get up here and say, look, I don't see a value proposition in attending if we're not looking to actively change it, if we're not looking to actively make it better.
Right. It's a good question. I don't know. I don't. Once again, you want to be careful about speaking for a large group of people, like the people attending CAST. It's the ultimate red card in that sense. But at the same time, you need. It's very easy to get into ruts and things like that, but very deadly, I think, in our industry if we're going to do something like that and not even realize it. You get desensitized to it, and there's so much that you need to do in order to refresh constantly. And I just think that in that sense that you can't be too critical about this kind of an issue. But at the same time, it's also something that I don't know that anyone has the answer to as far as that. There's so much individual interaction. And like you said, what is a conference supposed to do? I mean...
One of the things I love about CAST is that it's an environment where people are happy to challenge each other, and I think that's something that is, well, I'm not saying it's unique to CAST, but it's something that I think it happens at CAST perhaps more than other testing conferences. People will, happily engage each other, perhaps not so happily all the time, but certainly challenge each other's ideas and thought process. And I think this is something that you could take out to people in the hallway and sort of say, have you thought about this? This is something I think is a problem. What do you think? So in that, again, I still see that there is value in what you bring to the table. If you're not seeing something that you get value from, perhaps it's something that you should take the onus on yourself to go out and change.
Well, thinking on the presentation that we just saw before this, I mean, does that, as rarely as people read books, is it fair to criticize something like this, which may be the one time a year people get away in order to have some kind of educational experience?
Right. So this isn't people's day jobs, and people come here because they're interested and they're passionate about learning more about software testing, about interacting with other like-minded testers. And what it seems like you're saying is that because we seem to be treading the same sort of ground, maybe stuck in dogma or rhetoric, perhaps, that it's not something that's valuable to you?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that is part of it. I mean, there's a few interesting discussions that are going on right now, kind of out there as far as, there's no best practices, right? For example, is one that you'll hear really commonly. And I loved Alan Page's tweet the other day isn't no best practices a best practice? What do you do with the definition of that, based on, the discussions and the framework that's set up within the context-driven school?
I think it's those sorts of statements work for the people that like to trot them out. Look, no best practices is a heuristic more than a best practice in itself. It works to, I think, help people engage their brains. I don't think it's necessarily tired dogma that serves no purpose any further. It's cute. It's a cute thing to say, but whether it's true or not, I'm not so sure. Look, I think that the people who have been doing testing a long time do say a lot of the same things, perhaps because they feel that there are people there that still have that same lesson to learn.
Yeah, fair enough, for sure. I think that's the case, and I think there should be some people that are there probably repeating that over and over for the people that are new to it, because it's not their fault that it's new to it. But I guess maybe that's it's like one of those things like it's really hard to find an advanced programming book, for example. It's really hard, I think, to find an advanced testing book in some ways. There's a lot of beginner books, there's a lot of intermediate books, and maybe that's really the work that I'm talking about that needs to be done, is more of that advanced work for people who have that experience and are wanting to find new avenues and things like that. But, you know, going back to like the no best practices thing, I think that's one interesting thing there is I was reading in a book recently where they were talking about, you know, you have the two extremes, like in general, you know, the religious faction that basically says whatever the topic of discussion is needs to be taken on faith. And then you have the kind of relativists that are saying that, well, you know, it really depends on your experiences, and here's a toolbox that may work for you and can be most flexible. And between those two extremes, I think we need to start taking a few more positions that are more concrete, where we actually say more of what we think is the right and wrong way to do things. I think there's been a little bit too much context sensitivity in some ways that you know, it would be more helpful, and I'd possibly spur more discussion, probably lively discussion at the beginning, if we weren't so loose with that. And so that's something that I would like to see.
So you're looking for more specificity, but would be fair to say.
Yeah.
Okay, so within that, you'd also have to specify, I guess, a certain context in which you're applying whatever certain principle you're being certain about. So, you know, I think there's certainly room for that. There's enough sort of meta sort of theory.
Too much meta? There might be too much meta.
You know, it's easy to talk theory without getting specific, and I think that we can sort of fall into the trap of being sort of wishy-washy about it. And I do enjoy seeing specific examples when someone's bringing up a concept, and you know, here's a particular example of how I applied it, or how it worked for me, or how it didn't work. You know, I think we avoid doing that at our peril.
Well, that's that whole question of like experience reports, right, and the difficulty of getting them out of companies because of all the proprietary information and things like that. I know, like Rob Saborn does a lot of that as much as he can, but he still has ridiculous amounts of hurdles to get over just to trickle out the amount of things that he gets. And so, do you see that as something that is worth working on more, or do you just think that's always going to be a problem given the nature of the companies that we work for?
I think with a little bit of creativity, you can probably abstract a situation enough that you don't have to name names, and you can you know,
that's not any fun.
Perhaps not, but you know, if you want to be specific, you can find a way to be specific. You know, you don't have to necessarily take down an organisation. You know, if you weren't happy with the way things went there, I mean, you could choose to, but you know, it wouldn't serve you or them perhaps. Look, I think in terms of what you and I are expecting out of CAST, and what you and I are expecting to see, we've been in the industry for, you know, probably between us 25 years all told. So I think 10 for me, 15 or so for you. You know, we've been around the traps a while. We've you know, heard a lot of stuff from a lot of people, and so, you know, there's not going to be a lot of brand new stuff that we hear from people that we already know.
Right.
So I think expecting that is perhaps a little bit unfair. So, you know, but maybe there is something in bringing in non-testing blood, bringing in people whose experiences can inform testing without necessarily being about testing. That's something that I'd like to see. But you know, I think there is enormous value in attending this conference, and you know, where I have dissatisfaction, it's up to me to go to the organisers and say, look, I'd really like it if you guys did this next year, you know, which I'm more than happy to do.
Fair enough.
All right, so I think we're basically done. So I guess we can open up to open season.
You want to go to open season? Yeah. Good. Mind if I borrow one? Okay, so let's go into open season. I guess you will be asking about stuff. Okay, so let's start with Matt. And I will run the mic to you.
Yeah. They need that for the internet? Do you need the mic for the internet? Okay. So, this is great stuff, by the way. Thank you. One thing you touched on, I think it's a sort of an inherent problem with almost all professional. Like the testers get in this corner, and the programmers go to Uppsala, right? And the UI guys go to I don't know what, and the product people go to South by Southwest. And to some extent, you always have that meeting and you go, well, the problem is the programmers. The programmers are going, well, the problem is the testers. And the people in the room that could explain, oh, well, here's why I do it that way. Oh, I didn't realize, are not there. So there's a sort of, there's at least one direction of inherent compromise with a conference like this, right? So Duran wrote about quality circles. And for like 5 years, I thought, well, it's obvious. You get your practitioner community in a room, and then you have a circle of practice. And that he was talking about getting everyone in the product development cycle in a room so that when you say they're the problem, they can respond. That's not going to happen at CAST. We can try harder to reach out. We've done that a few years. And I think some of our keynotes, one of the keynotes is Trip Babbitt is not even from Test. But what if we did another conference that brought all those different forward-thinking groups, UX and Dev and Test and Product PO together? And we did it on a boat. So we're working on it if you want to talk.
I'd have to hear how Michael Bolton's boat trip with the ISTQB went before I'd sign up for anything like that.
Yeah, I reckon I'd be up for it. I think there's tremendous value in getting cross-pollination of professions together. I think you find interesting discussions happen when you have meetings of different people's values and different people's minds, for sure.
I'm interested in the process of transpection, and if you can talk a little bit about what we just observed and why it was transpection rather than just two guys sitting up there talking.
Right. It is a fair question. So I guess what we're trying to do is actively explore the idea that whether or not CAST is worth attending. So the entire time, I was conscious of keeping the conversation steered back to the original statement. I think conversations are more undirected. They tend to go where they go. This was I guess a chartered conversation, if you like. That's the way I look at Transpection.
Yeah, I think much like facilitation, if you're familiar with any of like the diamond models and things like that, there's a very similar idea where you want to start out and pose the question, open it up to kind of like a brainstorming situation where you could see where a few times we started to go off in a couple different directions, but then pulled back, and that came back together. And I think that would be the definition that would make it different from just two guys sitting up here talking, is that we do have some structure in our head that we're going along with and some shape to the conversation that we're actively trying to create as we do it.
You briefly mentioned going to non-testing conferences. Would you have concrete ideas what conferences could be useful to go to and take something to cast from?
I think there's ones that are that are somewhat more mixed, like there's OrDev, there's a lot of the O'Reilly open source conferences. They had some testing content in that one, for example, but I don't think it's as strong as something that it could be if people like from CAST attended. And so there would be, I think, those mix of people that Matt talked about, and that would be a good one. I think it would also just, if you could, this would be a little bit harder to access because I don't know what the good ones would be, but I think there could be some social science ones that could be very interesting to go to. Sociology, archaeology, something like, those where there's parallels to what we do and a much longer established tradition of field work, so to speak. You could say what some of what we do is field work, for example. And so I think a conference like that would be interesting. There's probably some much more outside ones that I don't know. Maybe you can think of, Ben, that would strike you as interesting. Kendo, perhaps.
Yeah, possibly. Martial arts, perhaps. But I'm thinking people who do disaster recovery, the police force, for instance. People who are training to be detectives and the process that they go through. I think something like that could be incredibly valuable for software testing to share. I think if we can it doesn't necessarily have to be even technology related. We can find stuff that we can use for sure.
Okay, so my stack is now empty. Did I forget anybody? Anybody have other questions?
A transpection session between testers Chris Blain and Ben Kelly.